premature and would stoke inflation and drive up interest rates, but there's trust that the country couldn't tax its way to growth and insisted modest tax cuts weren't inflationary. The two have different visions about how to deal with the immediate challenges, but it seems Ms Truss's plans are proving more popular, with polls continuing to suggest she's the frontrunner. During the hustings in Cardiff last night, the Foreign Secretary described the Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford as a low-energy version of Jeremy Corbyn. A few days ago, she caused anger within SNP circles when she called Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon an attention seeker who should be ignored. For his part, Rishi Sunak appeared to forget his own policy on onshore wind farms during the hustings, but campaign sources later said the former Chancellor had misspoken, where he said he would allow more onshore wind farms in England.
The family of Archie Battersby said it would like him to be transferred to a hospice following the end of their legal battle to stop his life support being withdrawn. Last night, the European Court of Human Rights refused to intervene, ending the family's last hope of using the law to keep the 12-year-old's treatment going. Lisa Pilgrim reports.
Archie Battersby's family would like him to be transferred from the Royal London Hospital in East London to a hospice, but doctors have warned there is a considerable risk in moving him. The family have been told they will have to apply to the High Court for Archie to be moved to a hospice by 9 o'clock this morning. Otherwise, his life support could be withdrawn from 11 a.m. 12-year-old Archie has been in a coma since he was found unconscious in April. Last night, the European Court of Human Rights said it wouldn't interfere in the decisions of judges in London, who said it would be in the boy's best interest to end life support. It said the appeal from his parents could not be admitted because there had been no breach of human rights. Last night, Archie's mother, Holly Dance, accepted the legal fight was over. She said she was absolutely devastated, but had fulfilled her promise to fight for her son to the end.
An investigation has found that sanctioned Russian oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin have exploited a secrecy loophole left open by the UK government. BBC News and the reporting project Finance Uncovered found thousands of company owners have been able to move money anonymously using firms known as English Limited Partnerships. The government says the UK has some of the strongest money laundering controls in the world. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity reports.
5 years ago, the British government forced almost all UK companies to identify their real owners, but English Limited Partnerships, or ELPs, were exempt. That's despite ministers being aware of the danger of limited partnerships being used in money laundering. A joint investigation by the BBC and Finance Uncovered has discovered that since then, more than 4,500 ELPs have been set up. Some are linked to fraud and terrorism, and a US Senate investigation has found that one ELP based in central London was used by oligarchs who have sanctions against them to launder money by buying and selling art. Boris and Arkady Rottenberg, longtime friends and judo partners of Vladimir Putin. The UK government said its forthcoming economic crime bill would improve transparency, ensuring that only those acting within the law can remain on the UK register. But anti-money laundering experts say there's nothing in their bill so far to stop the real owners of ELPs staying anonymous.
New research suggests recent reforms by the government to the UK's asylum policy has left people seeking safety at risk of exploitation. A report by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and the British Red Cross said asylum seekers were vulnerable as a result of being unable to work or access public funds, and found evidence of criminals forcing Vietnamese men to grow cannabis and offering women accommodation in return for sex. The Home Office says the new legislation is designed to destroy the business model of criminal gangs. There are 15 gold medals to be won at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham today. The competition's seventh day sees the start of the road cycling. After making it to the podium in the Tour de France, Geraint Thomas of Wales races in the individual time trial. Athletes from the home nations picked up medals last night too, with Scotland's Eilish McColgan winning the 10,000 metres to claim her first major title at the age of 31.
It's just an absolute dream. Honestly, it's my fourth attempt over 4 different events. I've come sixth every time, so even medals today, I was ready to win a medal, but you could see that last one I wanted gold, and it's on. I can't even print it. It's just mad.
A new study has highlighted the effect plastic waste is having on birds across the globe. Scientists in Scotland say they've had hundreds of photographs sent to them from every continent except Antarctica. Many of the images showed birds nesting in rubbish or tangled up in it.
Jane, thank you very much. It's 9 minutes past 7. When the Bank of England's latest interest rates decision is announced at midday today, the expectation is that the increase will be from 1.25% to 1.75%. If so, it will be the biggest jump for more than 25 years and an indication of the concern about inflation. The bank has already warned that inflation could exceed 11% this year, and there will be a new forecast released today. Torsten Bell is the chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, which works particularly on people on low and middle incomes. Morning, Torsten.
Good morning.
What is your expectation now about where and when inflation will peak?
Well, I think what we can say with certainty, and there's obviously a lot of uncertainty around all of this, as we've experienced over the last year, what we can say with some certainty is that the peak in inflation will be both higher than we previously expected, but also later. We thought this might be peaking around 10% in the middle of the autumn, but we're now heading towards over 10%, and that peak won't come until the early part of 2023.
So spring 2023, a report from your foundation yesterday said that it could rise to 15% in the first quarter of next year.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we just need to be aware that there's a lot of uncertainty around it. It's plausible. We could see figures well in excess of 10% if the historical relationships between different prices continues. And if you look at what's happening to manufacturers' input costs right now, they're rising huge record levels, 24%. Service producers are seeing inflation if their input costs are around 5%. And in the end, this is going to pass through to consumers in some form or another. So I think we should all have a lot of humility about being absolutely certain what's going to happen to inflation, but policymakers need to prepare for much higher inflation than we were expecting even a few months ago. And that's despite some good news. And if you look at some global commodity prices, they're coming down from the peaks we saw earlier in this year. That's true if you look at what's happening to lumber, and it's also true if we look at what's happening to lots of metals. So there's good news out there, but that's all being wiped out by the very, very bad news that's coming from global energy markets, particularly gas.
Right, that affects businesses as well as households. So on the Bank of England, if we had a series of 50 basis point increases in the months ahead, how much would that change that trajectory you're describing? Or when you've got such a big external factor, is there really a limit to what they can do?
Yeah, so that's a good way to think about it. So I think the way I would look at it overall is there's obviously lots of different shocks happening at once here to our economy and to inflation. Some of those wider shocks are easing, and that's to do with global supply chains and due to the spikes in global commodity prices that I was just mentioning. Others are getting worse, and that's to do with the Russian war and what that's done to energy prices. That isn't going to go away, and interest rate rises are only relevant to that insofar as they prevent that becoming embedded in our wage setting processes in the months and years ahead. They can't do anything about that actual rise in energy prices. I'd be surprised if we see several months of 0.5% increases from the Bank of England. I mean, what we're seeing generally is a market to much more bullish about how high rates will go than economists and actually the central bank itself has been. Now, there's obviously is pressure because the Fed, obviously, in the last 2 meetings has raised rates by 1.5% in total, which is more than the actual current rate of UK interest rates. So I think there's pressure from the global situation for people to put up interest rates by large amounts. We may see one rise of half a percentage point today. I'd be surprised if we see several months of that, because actually, if you look at what the Bank of England has been saying to us, they're also very worried about the state of the economy, that there may be a recession looming. We may well get a forecast of a recession in the updated forecast from the Bank of England later today.
Thorsten Bell, thank you very much. And let's turn then to Mel Stride, Conservative MP, who is chair of the Treasury Select Committee and is also one of those playing a leading role in Rishi Sunak's campaign to be Prime Minister. Good morning, Mr. Stride.
Good morning.
What would you like the Bank of England to do today?
Well, they've got to tread this very delicate path, as Thorsten says, between on the one hand taming inflation. I think the most important things that interest rates can do here now is to try and condition future inflationary expectations and the impact that that will have within the labour market. But on the other hand, they've got to be very careful to make sure that they don't tip the UK economy into a significant recession. So it is a really fine balancing act. It's going to be 0.25% or 0.5%. If it is 0.5%, as you were saying earlier, this will be the largest increase in interest rates for 27 years, so very significant. Very difficult decision to take. The last time they took a decision on what rate to increase, it was a split decision 6-3, and it could well be a split decision on this occasion too.
And this prospect of inflation heading to 15%, getting there in the first quarter of next year, what do you think the fiscal policy response to that should be? Doesn't it feed into, what do you think? Because you're obviously supporting Rishi Sunak, who's taken a particular view on tax and a different view from his rival, Liz Truss.
The most important challenge we've got at the moment is taming inflation, because inflation is ruinous to people's standards of living. It savers, it damages businesses, it damages employment prospects and all sorts of other things. So we've got to get on top of it. What we must do now is avoid stoking inflation and making the problem even worse. And one of the ways that you can make the problem very significantly worse is by coming forward with large-scale, tens of billions of pounds worth of unfunded tax cuts. Now, if you were to do that, there's a very interesting piece in the Telegraph today by Nigel Lawson, who with Margaret Thatcher faced exactly the same situation when she first came to power. What you must avoid doing is stoking inflation. You must get inflation under control before you start to look at tax cuts. And then when you bring tax cuts in, they need to be funded. So they need to be affordable, rather than putting them on the country's credit card and passing on that debt to future generations, to our children and to our grandchildren. So big decision fiscally here is around tax. You have to do it in a measured way and at the right time, but not start coming forward with tens of billions of unfunded tax cuts right now. I think that would be really quite interesting.
And yet so many of your colleagues, and it would appear increasing number of your colleagues, whether inside the parliamentary party or amongst the membership, feel differently about that, feel more persuaded by Liz Truss's approach.
I think as the arguments have been ventilated, more people are thinking actually about the consequence of massive unfunded tax cuts. Now, what we know, as we've just been discussing, that as inflation goes up further, interest rates have to rise, and that has a consequence, a real consequence for people up and down the country. Every 1% increase in interest rates means over £500, about £580 per month more on the average mortgage payment. So that's something that will hit people very hard. And in fact, Patrick Minford, who is the economic guru for Liz Truss, has suggested that these kind of moves could see interest rates increase by over 5%. I mean, that would have a catastrophic impact, both on mortgage repayment levels, but also on the housing market more generally, and of course on businesses too.
Nevertheless, the fact that people like Sajid Javid, the former Chancellor, are opting for Liz Truss rather than for Rishi Sunak, is Rishi Sunak coming under pressure to concede? That was something that Tim Montgomery, founder of Conservative Times, suggested to us yesterday might well happen soon, if not already.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. There's all to blame for here. I think there's a huge disconnect between the polling that there has been around the membership of the Conservative Party, which is inherently very difficult to carry out. It's also the case, I think, that it can very easily be skewed because these pollsters will not know exactly where the various concentrations of the membership are geographically and within different constituencies. And what we're finding, with our members of Parliament talking to their members on the ground, our supporters, is that there's a huge amount of support for Rishi far in advance of that appears to be coming through with some of these polls, albeit that some of the polls actually have them neck and neck. And the other point I would say is that what really matters in this contest is who is going to win the next general election for the Conservatives. And if you look at those polls, the answer is very clear. Is Rishi Sunak, particularly reaching out to those Labour voters that came to us in 2019 has since drifted away. So I think those are the most important things. So I sense on the ground a very different feeling to what we're seeing with some of these polls.
That's right, thank you. The time now is 18 minutes past 7. Live ammunition being fired in some of the world's busiest waterways. That's the punishment which China has decided to inflict in retaliation for the visit of Nancy Pelosi. The military drills began at 5 a.m. UK time in the Taiwan Strait, which is just 130 kilometres wide at its narrowest point. The people of Taiwan have long lived with the possibility of an invasion, but the threats intensified under President Xi Jinping ahead of a crucial ruling party meeting this autumn, at which he's expected to be given an unprecedented third term. We can talk now to Chris Parry, former Royal Navy Rear Admiral and NATO Commander. Good morning.
Good morning.
And looking at what's happening with the operation so far, these huge zones that China has outlined for these war games, it looks like something that's been a long time in preparation, doesn't it?
I think that's the case, and obviously we have to bear in mind that August the 1st is also the anniversary of the People Liberation Army, so they will have been doing something offshore to demonstrate their capability. But they have scaled this up. They've moved the exercise areas much closer to Taiwan, and this is a clear demonstration of their disquiet and their embarrassment at the visit by Nancy Pelosi just recently.
And what do you think their longer-term strategy is?
Oh, the long-term strategy is to absorb Taiwan back into China as they see it. Of course, they've never governed Taiwan in the past. But what's really interesting about these exercises is probably given us an indication of how they would absorb the island in future, and that is by blockade. These exercise areas effectively blockade Taiwan by air and sea, and I think that's what the Chinese would do rather than a direct invasion. And they would invite the free world, led by the United States, to come and break the blockade. And that presents a real military difficulty for the free world in actually getting the assets together and then fight their way, if they had to, into defend Taiwan.
And that's actually what we're seeing already this morning, isn't it? Because there's, commercial flights can't pass through these zones or ships, and with this prospect of long-range live ammunition firing, there's a possibility, there must be, of escalation.
I don't think so. If you look at the rhetoric from the Communist Party at the moment, it's really dialed down. They put a lot of censorship on social media to stop hawkish comments by the population. And you've even got comments by Chinese citizens saying, look, we've got to wait until we hear the official line before we can be hawkish. So I think on this occasion, the Chinese are not ready for any sort of military action. Xi Jinping wants to be anointed in his third term as party head in a few weeks' time. And I don't think with COVID and the economy not doing very well, this is a good time for China to act in relation to Taiwan. And frankly, they can't take on the United States at the moment in military terms, so we're safe for a while. What is slightly disturbing is that if the Chinese can stand up these sort of drills at short notice, they can keep doing it. It puts Taiwan on alert all the time, and frankly, it will become exhausting for their armed forces to react to this all the time. We saw this during the Cold War with the Russians. They kept on pulling aircraft and ships out into the Atlantic, and we had to respond all the time. So you're in a constant state of alert. So I suspect that's the pattern we'll see in future.
And how would you assess the defence capabilities of Taiwan? Chris Parry, can you still hear me?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yes, it was just one final question. I was just interested to hear your assessment of the kind of defence capabilities that Taiwan itself has and what you could expect from allies.
Yes, Taiwan has what we call porcupine capabilities. It has the ability to inflict a lot of pain on any forces that will come close to Taiwan. They're gaining more capabilities in future. They're building submarines, for example. And at the end of the day, the United States is committed, through its purpose of strategic ambiguity, to actually defend the island. Joe Biden has twice said they're going to help Taiwan defend its democracy and independence. That's been denied, of course, by the State Department, but in many ways this was reinforced by Nancy Pelosi saying that the United States would support democracy wherever it's found. So I think we can be pretty sure that in the front line between what I call the Eurasian autocracies, Russia, China, and Iran, and maritime